Marcus had always been the smartest boy in his village. At 17, he could solve math problems that made grown men scratch their heads. He could read ancient texts that even the village priest struggled with. Everyone said he was destined for great things, maybe even a position in the royal court someday. But Marcus had a problem. He was too clever for his own good, and he knew it. This made him cocky and sometimes reckless. He loved showing off his intelligence, especially when it meant outsmarting people who thought they were better than him. The kingdom of Aldoria was ruled by King Edmund, a fair but strict ruler who valued order above all else. The royal guards were known throughout the land for their discipline and unwavering loyalty. They were not just soldiers but also the enforcers of the king's law, respected and feared by all citizens. One autumn morning, Marcus was walking through the marketplace when he overheard two merchants talking in hushed voices. They spoke of a new royal decree that would impose heavy taxes on all young men who were not enrolled in formal education or military service. The tax was designed to encourage young people to contribute to society, but for someone like Marcus, who came from a poor farming family, it meant financial ruin. Marcus felt his blood boil. How could the king impose such an unfair law? He had been teaching himself through borrowed books and helping his family with their small farm. Why should he pay extra taxes just because he could not afford formal schooling? As he walked home that evening, Marcus passed by the royal guardhouse. Through the window, he could see Captain Aldrich, the head of the royal guard, reviewing documents by candlelight. Captain Aldrich was a man in his 40s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He had served the kingdom for over 20 years and was known for his strict adherence to rules and regulations. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. What if he could prove that this new tax law had legal flaws? What if he could outsmart the royal guard and show them that their precious decree was not as perfect as they thought? Marcus spent the next 3 days in the village library, studying old law books and royal decrees. He discovered something interesting. According to an ancient law that had never been repealed, any citizen could challenge a royal decree if they could prove it contradicted existing legislation. The challenge had to be presented formally to the royal guard, and if the citizen was correct, the decree would be suspended pending review by the royal court. The more Marcus researched, the more confident he became. He found several old laws that seemed to conflict with the new tax decree. In particular, there was a law from 50 years ago that stated young men engaged in agricultural work for their families were exempt from additional taxation. Another law protected citizens who were self-educating from penalties related to formal schooling requirements. Marcus carefully prepared his case, writing everything down in neat handwriting and organizing his arguments logically. He practiced his presentation in front of his mirror, imagining how impressed everyone would be when he outwitted the royal guard. He could already picture Captain Aldrich's surprised face when a simple village boy proved that the royal decree was legally flawed. On a crisp Monday morning, Marcus dressed in his best clothes and walked confidently to the royal guardhouse. His heart was pounding with excitement and nervousness, but he tried to appear calm and collected. This was his moment to shine, his chance to prove that intelligence could triumph over authority. The guardhouse was an impressive stone building with thick walls and heavy wooden doors. Marcus had never been inside before, and he felt a moment of intimidation as he approached the entrance. 2 guards stood at attention outside, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. "I wish to speak with Captain Aldrich," Marcus announced, trying to make his voice sound deeper and more authoritative than it actually was. One of the guards looked him up and down skeptically. "What business does a farm boy have with the captain?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I have a formal legal challenge to present regarding the new taxation decree." According to kingdom law, any citizen has the right to present such challenges to the royal guard. The guards exchanged glances. It was clear they had never encountered such a request before. After a brief discussion, one of them went inside to consult with Captain Aldrich. A few minutes later, the guard returned and gestured for Marcus to follow him inside. The interior of the guardhouse was even more impressive than the outside. The walls were lined with weapons and royal banners, and the air smelled of leather and metal polish. Marcus felt his confidence waver slightly, but he reminded himself of all the research he had done. Captain Aldrich was sitting behind a large wooden desk, reviewing documents. He looked up as Marcus entered, his sharp blue eyes studying the young man carefully. There was something in his gaze that made Marcus feel like he was being evaluated, measured, and perhaps found wanting. "So," Captain Aldrich said in a calm, measured voice, "I understand you believe you have found flaws in the king's new decree?" Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I have spent considerable time researching the matter, and I believe there are several existing laws that contradict the new taxation requirements." Captain Aldrich leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I see. And you think that you, a 17-year-old village boy, have discovered legal inconsistencies that the royal legal scholars missed?" There was no mockery in his tone, but Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Still, he was committed to his plan now. He had come too far to back down. "I believe the law is the law, regardless of who discovers the inconsistencies," Marcus replied, trying to sound confident. Captain Aldrich nodded slowly. "Very well. Present your case. I will listen to what you have to say." Marcus began his presentation, pulling out his carefully prepared notes and citing the various laws he had discovered. He spoke clearly and logically, explaining how the ancient agricultural exemption and the self-education protection laws contradicted the new decree. As he talked, he watched Captain Aldrich's face for any sign of surprise or concern, but the older man's expression remained neutral and attentive. When Marcus finished his presentation, there was a long moment of silence. Captain Aldrich tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "That was very thorough," the captain finally said. "You have clearly done your research." Marcus felt a surge of pride. He had done it. He had impressed the head of the Royal Guard with his intelligence and legal knowledge, but then Captain Aldrich smiled, and something in that smile made Marcus's stomach drop. It was not the smile of a man who had been outsmarted. It was the smile of someone who knew something that Marcus did not. "Tell me, Marcus," Captain Aldrich said, and the young man's heart skipped a beat. "How did the captain know his name? Do you know why I am smiling?" Marcus tried to keep his composure, but he could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead. I assume it is because you are impressed with my research, sir." Captain Aldrich chuckled softly. "Oh, I am impressed, but not for the reasons you might think." He stood up from his desk and walked around to face Marcus directly. "You see, your research was indeed thorough. You found exactly the laws I expected you would find." "Expected?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Of course. Did you really think that a decree affecting the entire kingdom would be drafted without considering existing laws? Did you believe that our royal legal scholars, who have spent decades studying the law, would make such elementary mistakes?" Marcus felt his confidence crumbling like a house made of sand. "But the contradictions are clear. The laws I cited clearly conflict with the new decree." Captain Aldrich nodded. "They do indeed appear to conflict, on the surface. But here is what your research missed, young scholar." He walked over to a large bookshelf and pulled out a thick leather-bound volume. "This is the Royal Legal Compendium, updated every year to reflect changes in the law." Marcus watched with growing dread as the captain opened the book and flipped through several pages. "The agricultural exemption, law you cited so confidently," Captain Aldrich continued, "was modified 3 years ago. The modification states that the exemption only applies to families owning more than 10 acres of land and employing at least 3 non-family workers." "How much land does your family own, Marcus?" Marcus's throat felt dry. About 2 acres, sir." "And how many non-family workers do they employ?" "None, sir. We cannot afford to hire help." Captain Aldrich nodded sympathetically. "So that exemption does not apply to you. What about the self-education protection law? Surely that covers your situation." Marcus had been dreading this moment. Even during his research, he had wondered about the specifics of that law, but he had not been able to find the complete text. I could not find all the details of that law, sir." "Allow me to help you with that," Captain Aldrich said, flipping to another section of the book. "The self-education protection law does exist, but it requires formal registration with the kingdom's education ministry. The self-studying individual must demonstrate their progress through annual examinations administered by certified scholars." "Tell me, Marcus, are you registered with the education ministry?" Marcus shook his head slowly, feeling like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. "Have you taken any formal examinations to document your educational progress?" Again, Marcus shook his head. He felt foolish now, realizing how many gaps there had been in his research. The village library was small and outdated, and he had not had access to the most current legal documents. Captain Aldrich closed the book and set it back on the shelf. So you see, Marcus, while your research was admirable in its scope and effort, it was incomplete. The laws you cited do not actually protect you from the new taxation decree. Marcus stared at the floor, his face burning with embarrassment. All his confidence had evaporated, replaced by a crushing sense of failure. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could outwit the royal guard with his intelligence. Instead, he had made a fool of himself in front of one of the most important people in the kingdom. I suppose you think I am just another arrogant boy who thought he was smarter than his betters, Marcus said quietly. Captain Aldrich studied him for a long moment. Actually, no. I think you are a young man with genuine intelligence who made the mistake of rushing to judgment with incomplete information. There is a difference. Marcus looked up, surprised by the lack of mockery in the captain's voice. Your research, while flawed, showed considerable initiative and analytical thinking, Captain Aldrich continued. You found the relevant laws, you organized your arguments logically, and you presented your case clearly and respectfully. These are valuable skills, Marcus. The problem is not your intelligence, but your approach. What do you mean, sir? Captain Aldrich sat back down at his desk and gestured for Marcus to take a seat across from him. You approach this challenge as if it were a game to be won, rather than a serious legal matter with real consequences. You were more interested in proving your cleverness than in actually understanding the law. You wanted to outwit the royal guard rather than work with us to find a legitimate solution to your problem. Marcus felt a sting of truth in those words. He had been more focused on showing off than on actually solving his family's financial difficulties. Let me ask you something, Captain Aldrich said. What was your real goal in coming here today? Was it to challenge the decree, or was it to prove that you were smarter than everyone else? Marcus thought about it honestly. I think it was both, sir. I do need help with the tax situation, but I also wanted to prove myself. At least you are honest. That is more than I can say for many people who come through these doors. Captain Aldrich leaned forward slightly. Marcus, intelligence without wisdom is like a sharp sword in the hands of a child. It can be dangerous both to others and to the person wielding it. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Do I face punishment for wasting your time with a frivolous challenge? Captain Aldrich shook his head. Your challenge was not frivolous, even though it was unsuccessful. You followed the proper legal procedures, you conducted research, and you presented your case respectfully. Those are not crimes, Marcus. They are qualities we need more of in this kingdom. Marcus looked confused. I do not understand, sir. The new taxation decree includes provisions for citizens who find themselves in difficult financial situations due to the new requirements, Captain Aldrich explained. There are programs to help young people like yourself gain the formal education or training needed to qualify for exemptions. There are also payment plans and hardship considerations for families who cannot immediately afford the new taxes. But why was this not announced publicly? Marcus asked. Captain Aldrich smiled again, but this time it was a warmer expression. It was announced, Marcus, but perhaps not in places where a busy farm boy would hear about it. The information was posted at the royal courthouse, announced at the monthly town meetings, and distributed to all registered citizens. Your family is not registered with the kingdom's citizen registry, are they? Marcus shook his head, feeling more foolish by the minute. His family had always lived quietly, keeping to themselves and avoiding what they saw as unnecessary government entanglements. You see, this is what I mean about incomplete information leading to poor decisions, Captain Aldrich said gently. You have been operating with only fragments of the full picture. Your research was thorough within its limited scope, but the scope itself was too narrow. Marcus sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything he had learned. His grand plan to outwit the royal guard had collapsed completely, but he was beginning to realize that his failure might have been more valuable than success would have been. What should I do now, sir? He asked finally. Captain Aldrich looked at him thoughtfully. That depends on what you have learned from this experience and what you truly want to achieve with your life. Marcus considered the question carefully. The morning had not gone at all as he had planned, but it had certainly been educational in ways he had not expected. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. The morning had humbled him in ways he had never expected, but it had also opened his eyes to possibilities he had not considered before. I have learned that being smart is not the same as being wise, he said slowly. I thought I could solve a complex problem by being clever, but I realize now that I was missing too much information to make good decisions. I want to learn how to use my intelligence more effectively, sir. Captain Aldrich nodded approvingly. That is a mature response, Marcus. Now, let me ask you something else. Why did you teach yourself to read ancient texts and solve complex mathematical problems? What drives your hunger for knowledge? Marcus thought about it. I suppose I have always been curious about how things work. When I see a problem, I want to understand it and find solutions. My father says I ask too many questions, but I cannot help myself. I see connections between different ideas, and I enjoy figuring out puzzles that others find difficult. And what do you hope to do with these abilities? I had hoped to maybe work for the royal court someday, or become a scholar, or perhaps help improve conditions in our village. But my family needs me on the farm, and we cannot afford formal education. I feel trapped between what I want to do and what I must do. Captain Aldrich was quiet for several minutes, apparently deep in thought. Marcus waited nervously, wondering if he had said something wrong. Finally, the captain spoke again. Marcus, I am going to tell you something that very few people know. The Royal Guard is more than just a military organization. We are also responsible for gathering intelligence, investigating problems throughout the kingdom, and advising the king on matters of law and policy. This work requires people with sharp minds, strong analytical skills, and the ability to see patterns and connections that others might miss. Marcus felt his heart begin to beat faster. Are you saying? I am saying that your failed attempt to outwit me has actually demonstrated several qualities that we value highly. You conducted thorough research with limited resources. You organized complex information logically. You presented your arguments clearly and respectfully, even when you thought you were challenging authority. And most importantly, when confronted with your mistakes, you accepted them gracefully and showed genuine desire to learn. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing, but I failed completely. I made a fool of myself. Captain Aldrich shook his head. You made mistakes based on incomplete information and overconfidence. Those are correctable problems, Marcus. Stupidity and dishonesty are not correctable, but you have demonstrated neither of those qualities. What are you suggesting, sir? I am suggesting that you might be interested in a different kind of education than the formal schooling you cannot afford. The Royal Guard maintains a training program for young people who show potential for intelligence work. It is demanding, both physically and mentally, but it would provide you with the education and skills you seek while also serving the kingdom. Marcus felt dizzy with the possibility. You would consider me for such a program? After what happened today? Especially after what happened today, Captain Aldrich said firmly. Do you think I would waste time explaining your mistakes to someone I did not believe could learn from them? Do you think I would reveal information about the Royal Guard's intelligence work to someone I did not trust? Marcus stared at him in amazement. You planned this, didn't you? You knew I would come here with a flawed challenge. Captain Aldrich smiled mysteriously. Let me tell you what really happened today, Marcus. 3 days ago, I received a report that a young man in your village had been asking unusual questions at the library and studying old law books with great intensity. My sources suggested that this young man might be planning some kind of challenge to the new decree. You have been watching me? Not watching, monitoring. There is a difference. Part of our job is to be aware of potential problems before they become actual problems. When I learned about your activities, I was curious about your motivations and methods. Were you a troublemaker looking to cause problems? Were you a criminal planning something illegal? Or were you simply an intelligent young person trying to solve a problem? Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. You could have stopped me at any time, of course, but that would not have told me what I needed to know about your character and abilities. By allowing you to proceed with your plan, I was able to observe your research methods, your logical reasoning, your presentation skills, and your reaction to failure. This morning was not just a legal challenge, Marcus. It was an examination. Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. And did I pass this examination? You passed the most important parts. Your research showed initiative and analytical thinking, even though it was incomplete. Your presentation was clear and respectful, even though your conclusions were wrong. And your reaction to failure showed humility and genuine desire to learn, rather than defensiveness or anger. But I also showed overconfidence and poor judgment, Marcus pointed out. Yes, you did. But those are problems of youth and inexperience, not fundamental character flaws. We can work with overconfidence and poor judgment. We cannot work with stupidity or dishonesty. Marcus tried to process everything he had learned. The morning had begun with him thinking he was about to outwit the Royal Guard. Instead, he discovered that the Royal Guard had been testing him all along. What would this training program involve? He asked. Physical conditioning, combat training, legal studies, investigative techniques, critical thinking exercises, and practical field experience. You would live at the royal compound during your training, but you would be paid a small salary that you could send home to help your family. After completing the program, you would have several options for service within the Royal Guard or other government positions. It sounded almost too good to be true. What would be expected of me? Absolute honesty, complete loyalty to the kingdom, willingness to work hard and learn from your mistakes, and the ability to put the greater good above your personal interests. The work is often dangerous, always demanding, and frequently thankless, but it is also important, challenging, and rewarding for those suited to it. Marcus thought about his life on the farm, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting, the financial struggles, the feeling of wasting his intellectual abilities on simple manual labor. Then he thought about the possibility of using his mind to serve his kingdom, of learning skills that would challenge him, of having a career that would make a difference. May I ask you something, sir? Of course. Why are you offering this opportunity to me? There must be other young people with similar abilities who have not made the mistakes I made today. Captain Aldrich considered the question carefully. That is exactly why I am offering it to you, Marcus. Most intelligent young people from educated families never have to struggle with incomplete information or limited resources. They never have to take risks or challenge authority to get what they need. They follow predictable paths and develop predictable skills. But you have had to be resourceful, creative, and bold just to educate yourself. You have had to work with limited information and still reach useful conclusions. You have had to take initiative without guidance or support. These are exactly the qualities we need in intelligence work. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with nervousness. When would I need to decide? Take a week to think about it. Discuss it with your family. Consider all the implications carefully. This is not a decision to be made lightly or quickly. And if I decide to accept, then your real education would begin. And Marcus, Captain Aldrich fixed him with a serious stare. If you choose this path, your days of trying to outwit authority figures will be over. You would become part of that authority, with all the responsibilities that entails. Marcus nodded solemnly. I understand, sir. May I ask one more question? What is it? Did you really expect me to find those specific laws, or was that just luck? Captain Aldrich laughed for the first time that morning. Marcus, there are no coincidences in intelligence work. Everything that happened today happened exactly as I expected it would. The question now is whether you will choose to be part of making such careful plans, rather than being the subject of them. Marcus walked home in a daze, his mind reeling from everything that had happened. The morning sun had given way to afternoon clouds, and the familiar path to his family's farm seemed different somehow, as if he were seeing it through new eyes. When he arrived home, his parents were working in the vegetable garden behind their small stone house. His father, Thomas, was a weathered man in his 50s with calloused hands and a practical approach to life. His mother, Elena, was younger but equally hard-working, known throughout the village for her skill with herbal remedies and her gentle wisdom. You are back early, his mother observed, looking up from the carrot she was harvesting. How did your meeting with the Royal Guard go? Marcus had told his parents about his plan to challenge the decree, though he had not shared the full extent of his confidence in outwitting Captain Aldrich. Now he felt grateful for his discretion. It did not go as I expected, he said carefully, but it was educational. His father straightened up, wiping dirt from his hands. Did you get yourself in trouble with your clever schemes, boy? No, father. Actually, the opposite happened. Marcus took a deep breath. Captain Aldrich offered me a position in a Royal Guard training program. Both parents stopped working and stared at him in shock. What kind of position? His mother asked. Marcus explained everything that had happened, from his failed legal challenge to Captain Aldrich's revelation about the true nature of the morning's events. His parents listened in silence, their expression shifting from surprise to concern to thoughtful consideration. So this captain thinks you have potential for intelligence work? His father said when Marcus finished his account. Yes, sir. But he also made it clear that the decision is mine to make, and that I should discuss it thoroughly with you and Mother. Elena sat down on a wooden stool, her face troubled. Marcus, this sounds like a wonderful opportunity, but it also sounds dangerous. Intelligence work means dealing with criminals, spies, and other threats to the kingdom. I know, Mother. Captain Aldrich was honest about the risks. But he also explained that the training would prepare me for those dangers, and that the work would allow me to use my abilities in service to our kingdom. Thomas walked over to the well and drew up a bucket of water, drinking deeply before speaking. Son, you have never been satisfied with farm life. Your mother and I have known for years that you were destined for something different, but we also know that you can be impulsive and overconfident. Today taught me a hard lesson about overconfidence, Father. I thought I was so clever, but Captain Aldrich showed me how much I still have to learn. That may be the most important lesson you could have learned, Elena said softly. But tell me, Marcus, what draws you to this opportunity? Is it the chance to escape farm work, or is it something deeper? Marcus had been asking himself the same question during his walk home. I think it is both, Mother. I do want to escape the limitations of our current situation, but I also genuinely want to serve our kingdom and use my abilities to help solve important problems. This morning showed me that there are complex challenges in our world that require careful thought and investigation. I want to be part of addressing those challenges. His father nodded slowly. Your motivations sound honest, son. But what about us? This farm requires hard work, and we are not getting any younger. The program includes a salary that I could send home to help with expenses, Marcus explained. It might actually provide more financial support than my labor on the farm does currently. Money is not our only concern, Elena said. This training program would take you away from home for an extended period. We would worry about your safety constantly. I understand that, Mother, but I also think about what my life would be like if I stayed here. I would always wonder what I might have accomplished if I had taken this chance. And my restlessness and ambition might eventually make me bitter and difficult to live with. Thomas exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. Your mother and I need to discuss this privately, son. Why do not you spend some time thinking about what questions you would like to ask Captain Aldrich before making your final decision? Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the village, trying to imagine what his life would be like if he accepted the captain's offer. He stopped by the library where he had done his research, looking at the limited collection of books that had seemed so impressive just a few days ago. Now he realized how much knowledge existed beyond these walls, waiting to be discovered. He also visited the marketplace where he had first heard about the taxation decree. The merchants were busy with their daily trade, unaware of the larger forces that shaped their lives. Marcus wondered what problems they faced that might benefit from the kind of careful investigation and analysis he hoped to learn. That evening, his parents called him to sit with them by the fireplace. The autumn air had grown cold, and the warmth felt comforting as they prepared for a serious conversation. Your mother and I have discussed your opportunity extensively, Thomas began. We have also talked to several neighbors whose opinions we respect, without revealing specific details of your situation. What did you conclude? Marcus asked nervously. Elena took his hand in hers. We concluded that we raised you to be an honest, thoughtful young man with strong values and genuine concern for others. We trust your judgment, even when it has led you into overconfident mistakes. We also concluded that keeping you here against your nature would be unfair to you and ultimately harmful to our family. Thomas added, a person who feels trapped and unfulfilled cannot contribute their best efforts to anything. Marcus felt his eyes begin to water. Are you saying you support my decision to accept the offer? We are saying we support whatever decision you make, as long as it is based on careful thought rather than impulsive excitement, Elena said. But we also want you to consider some questions before you decide. What questions? Thomas leaned forward. First, are you prepared for the physical demands of military training? You are intelligent, son, but you have never been particularly athletic or interested in combat. That is a fair concern, Father. I will need to ask Captain Aldrich about the physical requirements and whether there is any preparation I should do before beginning training. Second, Elena continued, are you prepared for the moral complexities of intelligence work? You may be asked to deceive people, investigate friends and neighbors, or make decisions that affect the lives of others in ways you cannot predict. Marcus had not considered this aspect thoroughly. That is something I need to think about more carefully. I should ask Captain Aldrich about the ethical guidelines that govern intelligence work. Third, Thomas said, are you prepared for the possibility that this work might change you in fundamental ways? The innocent, optimistic young man we know today might become someone harder and more suspicious after years of dealing with criminals and threats. This question troubled Marcus deeply. I hoped that my core values would remain unchanged, but I admit I do not know how this kind of work might affect my personality over time. These are not questions with easy answers, Elena said gently. But they are questions you should consider seriously before committing to this path. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I will make a list of concerns to discuss with Captain Aldrich. I want to understand exactly what I would be agreeing to before I make my decision. That sounds wise, Thomas said. We also want you to know that whatever you decide, we will be proud of you. You have already shown more initiative and courage than most young men your age. And remember, Elena added, if you try this path and discover it is not right for you, there is no shame in returning home. Our door will always be open to you. Marcus felt overwhelmed with gratitude for his parents' support and wisdom. He had been so focused on the excitement of the opportunity that he had not considered many of the deeper implications they had raised. I love you both, he said simply. Thank you for helping me think this through properly. That is what parents are for, Elena smiled. Now, what other questions do you think you should ask Captain Aldrich? Marcus spent the next 3 days carefully preparing a list of questions and concerns to discuss with Captain Aldrich. He wanted to make sure he understood every aspect of the opportunity before making his decision. His parents had helped him think of issues he would never have considered on his own, and he was grateful for their guidance. On Thursday morning, he returned to the Royal Guardhouse with his list neatly written on 2 pieces of parchment. The same guards were stationed outside and they recognized him from his previous visit. Back to challenge more royal decrees? One of them joked. Actually, I am here to ask questions this time instead of making assumptions, Marcus replied with a smile. The guard chuckled and gestured toward the entrance. That sounds like progress. Go on in. Captain Aldrich is expecting you. Marcus found Captain Aldrich in the same office, but this time he was not alone. A woman in her 30s sat across from his desk, dressed in simple traveling clothes but carrying herself with obvious authority. She had short brown hair, keen green eyes, and several small scars on her hands that suggested she was experienced in dangerous work. Marcus, good to see you again, Captain Aldrich said, rising from his desk. I would like you to meet Sarah Mitchell, one of our most experienced intelligence operatives. I asked her to join us today so you could hear about this work from someone who does it every day. Sarah stood and offered her hand to Marcus. Her grip was firm and confident. Captain Aldrich tells me you are considering joining our training program. I hope I can answer some practical questions about what that would actually involve. Marcus shook her hand, trying not to stare at the scars. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I have many questions about both the training and the actual work. Excellent, Captain Aldrich said, gesturing for everyone to sit down. Questions are the foundation of good intelligence work. What would you like to know? Marcus consulted his list. First, I am concerned about the physical demands of the training. I am not particularly athletic, and I have never been in combat. Would I be able to meet the requirements? Sarah answered this question. The physical training is demanding, but it is designed to build strength and skills gradually. We have trained many people who started with no athletic background. The key is determination and willingness to work hard, not starting physical ability. However, you should know that the combat training includes both armed and unarmed fighting techniques, and you will be expected to become proficient in both. What does combat training involve exactly? Marcus asked. Sword work, knife fighting, archery, and hand-to-hand combat, Sarah replied. You will also learn defensive techniques, escape methods, and how to disarm opponents. Most intelligence operatives never use these skills in actual missions, but we never know when they might be necessary. Marcus made notes on his parchment. My second concern involves the ethical aspects of intelligence work. My parents worried that I might be asked to deceive people or investigate innocent citizens. How do you handle the moral complexities of this work? Captain Aldrich and Sarah exchanged a meaningful look before the captain responded. That is perhaps the most important question you could ask, Marcus. Intelligence work does sometimes require deception, but it is always in service of protecting the kingdom and its people. We have strict ethical guidelines that govern our activities. Sarah leaned forward. Let me give you a practical example. Last year, I spent 3 months working undercover in a merchant caravan that we suspected was smuggling weapons to enemies of the kingdom. I had to lie about my identity and background to gain the trust of the smugglers, but my deception prevented those weapons from being used against our soldiers and civilians. How do you justify the deception to yourself? Marcus asked. By remembering that my primary duty is to protect innocent people, Sarah replied. The smugglers I deceived were planning to cause harm to others. My lies prevented greater harm from occurring. However, I would never deceive innocent people just to make my job easier or to gather information that was not essential to protecting the kingdom. Captain Aldrich nodded. We also have oversight procedures to ensure that our methods remain ethical. No operative works alone on sensitive missions, and all major decisions are reviewed by senior officers who are not directly involved in the operation. Marcus wrote down more notes. What about investigating friends and neighbors? Would I be required to spy on people from my own village? It is possible, Captain Aldrich said honestly. If credible evidence suggested that someone from your village was involved in activities that threatened the kingdom, you might be asked to investigate. However, we would never ask you to investigate people simply because they were available or convenient targets. Sarah added, in my experience, most investigations involve people who have already raised legitimate suspicions through their actions. We do not randomly spy on citizens for no reason. Our resources are limited and we focus them on actual threats. My third major concern, Marcus continued, is whether this work might change my personality in negative ways. My parents worry that dealing with criminals and threats might make me hard and suspicious. Sarah smiled at this question. Your parents sound wise. This is a real risk in our profession. I have seen operatives become cynical, paranoid, and unable to trust anyone, but I have also seen others maintain their humanity and compassion, despite years of difficult work. What makes the difference? Marcus asked. Strong personal values, good relationships outside of work, and honest self-reflection, Captain Aldrich replied. We require all operatives to meet regularly with counselors who help them process their experiences and maintain their emotional health. We also encourage maintaining friendships and activities that have nothing to do with intelligence work. Sarah nodded. I've been doing this work for 8 years and I still enjoy reading poetry, gardening, and spending time with my nieces and nephews. The key is remembering that this is what I do, not who I am. Marcus appreciated their honesty about the risks. What would happen if I tried the training program and discovered that this work was not right for me? Nothing shameful or punitive, Captain Aldrich assured him. About 1 in 4 trainees decide that intelligence work is not for them, usually within the first few months. They are free to leave the program and pursue other opportunities. Some join the regular military, others find positions in the royal administration, and some return to civilian life. We would rather have someone leave early than struggle through training and become an ineffective or unhappy operative, Sarah added. This work requires genuine commitment and aptitude. There is no shame in discovering that your talents lie elsewhere. Marcus consulted his list again. What would my daily life be like during training? Sarah answered this question in detail. You would wake at dawn for physical conditioning. After breakfast, you would have classes in law, history, geography, languages, and analytical thinking. Afternoons would involve practical exercises in observation, investigation techniques, and report writing. Evenings would include combat training, followed by study time and preparation for the next day. How long would the training last? 2 years for the basic program, Captain Aldrich replied. After that, you would spend another year in supervised field experience before becoming a full operative. However, learning continues throughout your career. The kingdom faces new challenges constantly, and we must adapt our methods accordingly. What kinds of missions would I be assigned as a new operative? Initially, mostly domestic investigations, Sarah explained. Smuggling operations, tax evasion, corruption in local government, that sort of thing. As you gain experience and prove your abilities, you might be assigned to more complex cases involving foreign threats or high-level political matters. Marcus had one more important question. What opportunities would I have for advancement within the organization? Captain Aldrich smiled. That would depend entirely on your performance and interests. Experienced operatives can become team leaders, training instructors, analysts, or administrators. Some eventually join the royal court as advisors. Others prefer to remain field operatives throughout their careers. The organization tries to match people with roles that suit their abilities and preferences. Marcus looked over his notes, feeling that he had a much clearer understanding of what he would be committing to. I think you have answered all my major concerns. May I ask one final question? Of course, Captain Aldrich said. Based on our conversation today and your observations of me earlier this week, do you honestly believe I have the potential to succeed in this work? Captain Aldrich considered the question seriously. Marcus, I believe you have the intellectual abilities, moral character, and personal motivation to excel in intelligence work. You have shown that you can learn from mistakes, think analytically, and maintain respect for others even under pressure. These are essential qualities for our profession. Sarah nodded in agreement. Your questions today have been thoughtful and practical. You are clearly taking this decision seriously and considering all the implications. That kind of careful thinking is exactly what we need in our operatives. However, Captain Aldrich continued, success in this field requires more than just potential. It requires dedication, perseverance. That evening, Marcus sat with his parents by the fireplace once again, sharing everything he had learned from his conversation with Captain Aldrich and Sarah Mitchell. He read from his notes describing the training program, the ethical guidelines, the career opportunities, and the honest assessment of risks and challenges. His parents listened carefully, asking occasional questions for clarification. When Marcus finished his account, they sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. It sounds like you received honest answers to honest questions, Elena finally said. That speaks well of both the organization and your approach to this decision. Thomas nodded. Son, your mother and I have been talking about this situation for days. We want to share some thoughts that might help you with your final decision. I would appreciate that, Father. First, we are proud of how you have handled this entire experience. A week ago, you were an overconfident young man who thought he could outwit the Royal Guard through cleverness alone. Today you are asking thoughtful questions and carefully considering the implications of a major life decision. That shows real growth and maturity. Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest at his father's words. Elena continued. Second, we believe that this opportunity aligns well with your natural abilities and interests. You have always been drawn to puzzles, problems, and questions about how things work. Intelligence work would allow you to use these interests in service to something larger than yourself. Third, Thomas added, we trust the character we have seen you develop over 17 years. You have always been honest even when honesty was difficult. You have always shown concern for others even when it was inconvenient. You have always been willing to work hard for things you believed in. These qualities will serve you well in any profession, but they are especially important in work that involves power and responsibility. What concerns do you still have? Marcus asked. Elena sighed softly. Our main concern is not about your character or abilities, son. It is about the inherent unpredictability of intelligence work. Sarah Mitchell spoke honestly about the risks, but she could not tell you about specific dangers you might face because she does not know what threats the kingdom will encounter in the coming years. That is true, Marcus acknowledged, but every profession involves some unpredictability. Farmers face weather, disease, and market changes that we cannot predict or control. Thomas smiled. You are right about that. I suppose what we are really concerned about is whether you are choosing this path for the right reasons. What do you mean? Are you choosing intelligence work because you genuinely want to serve the kingdom and use your abilities to solve important problems? Or are you choosing it because it seems exciting and offers an escape from the limitations of farm life? Marcus had been wrestling with this question for days. I think it is both, Father. But the balance has shifted as I have learned more about what the work actually involves. Initially, I was more motivated by the excitement and the escape, but after talking with Captain Aldrich and Sarah, I find myself most interested in the opportunity to contribute to something important and challenging. That sounds like an honest answer, Elena said, and the fact that you recognize both motivations shows self-awareness that will help you make good decisions. Marcus looked into the fire, watching the flames dance as he considered his choice. I think I want to accept the offer, but I am still nervous about leaving home and family. That nervousness is natural and healthy, Thomas said. If you were not nervous about such a major change, we would be worried about your judgment. Elena reached over and took Marcus's hand. Son, we have always known that you were destined for something beyond our small farm. We hope to keep you with us longer, but we also want you to have the opportunity to develop your full potential. We will miss you terribly, Thomas added, but we will also be proud to know that our son is serving the kingdom and using his abilities to protect others. Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. I will miss you both as well, but I think this is the right choice for me, and I believe it will ultimately benefit our family as well. Then you have our blessing, Elena said softly. When will you tell Captain Aldrich? Tomorrow morning. He said I could begin training immediately if I decide to accept. Thomas stood up and walked over to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. He opened it and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. This belonged to your grandfather. He used it to record his thoughts and observations during his travels as a young merchant. I want you to have it. Marcus accepted the journal with reverence. His grandfather had died when Marcus was very young, but he remembered stories about the old man's adventures and wisdom. Use it to record your experiences during training, Elena suggested. Someday you might want to share your story with your own children. Marcus hugged both parents tightly, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for their love and support. Thank you for everything. I promise to write regularly and visit whenever I can. Just promise to stay true to yourself, Thomas said. No matter what challenges you face or what opportunities arise, remember the values we have tried to teach you. I promise, Father. The next morning, Marcus woke before dawn and spent an hour walking through the village one last time. He visited the library where he had conducted his flawed research, the marketplace where he had first heard about the taxation decree, and the fields where he had worked alongside his father for so many years. Everything looked the same, but Marcus felt fundamentally changed by the events of the past week. He was no longer the overconfident young man who thought he could outwit authority through cleverness alone. He was someone who understood the value of humility, thorough preparation, and service to others. When he arrived at the Royal Guardhouse, Captain Aldrich was waiting for him in the courtyard, along with Sarah Mitchell and two other people Marcus did not recognize. Good morning, Marcus, Captain Aldrich said. Have you reached a decision? Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked the captain directly in the eyes. Yes, sir. I would like to accept your offer and join the training program. Captain Aldrich smiled and extended his hand. Welcome to the Royal Guard, Marcus. Your real education begins today. As Marcus shook the captain's hand, he thought about how different this moment was from his expectations a week ago. He had come to the guardhouse thinking he would outwit them and prove his superiority. Instead, he had been outwitted himself, and in the process had discovered an opportunity that was far better than anything he could have achieved through his original plan. Sarah stepped forward with a bundle of clothing and equipment. These are your training uniforms and basic supplies. You will receive additional equipment as your training progresses. One of the other people, a stern-looking man in his 40s, introduced himself as Sergeant Barnes, the physical training instructor. I hope you are ready to work harder than you have ever worked before. Young man. The second person, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, introduced herself as Master Elena Wordsworth, the academic instructor. I understand you have been educating yourself through independent study. I look forward to building on that foundation with more structured learning. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he realized that his new life was beginning immediately. When do I start training? Right now, Captain Aldrich said. Sergeant Barnes will show you to your quarters and explain the daily schedule. Your first classes begin this afternoon. As Marcus followed Sergeant Barnes toward the training facilities, he looked back once at the road that led to his family's farm. He whispered a silent thank you to his parents and a promise to make them proud. Then he turned his attention forward, toward a future full of challenges, opportunities, and service to his kingdom. The clever student who had thought he could outwit the Royal Guard was gone. In his place was a young man ready to learn, grow, and dedicate his abilities to something greater than himself. Captain Aldrich watched Marcus disappear into the training compound, then turned to Sarah with a satisfied smile. What do you think of our new recruit? Sarah nodded approvingly. I think he has the potential to become one of our best operatives. His failure taught him humility and his questions showed wisdom. That combination is rare and valuable. Indeed it is, Captain Aldrich agreed. Sometimes the best way to discover someone's true character is to let them fail and see how they respond to that failure. Marcus responded exactly as we hoped he would. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the guardhouse courtyard, Captain Aldrich reflected on the week's events. The young man who had tried to outwit him had instead been recruited into service. It was, he thought, a much better outcome than either of them had originally planned.